Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game. And this is part 12 of my Whispers of the Old Gods card review. I've got about 4 cards today to take a closer look at, and there are some doozies in this set indeed. Starting off, of course, with the biggest of them all, the 10 mana Deathwing Dragonlord. This is another variation on Deathwing, which I'm a little sad about that we're already duplicating character names from the Warcraft lore so deliberately and obviously as this one. It's just standard Deathwing again, but with a slightly different name. It's a little bit confusing and a little sad when there are so many other great cards and characters that could be created. But anyway, Deathwing Dragonlord is a 12/12 again, much like the original Deathwing, also at 10 mana. And in fact, the effect, though, is almost different, in fact, opposite in a way. This Deathwing has a death rattle instead of a battle cry, and it puts all dragons from your hand into the battlefield. So you play this Deathwing for 10 mana, and if your opponent is able to or decides to kill it, then they may have 3 or 4 dragons on the board after that point. So basically, playing Deathwing Dragonlord puts your opponent in a situation where they have to either leave a 12/12 alive on the board, which of course can be quite troublesome, or they have to find a way to kill it, which can also be sometimes difficult if you don't have a big game hunter, or if big game hunter doesn't exist, since we still don't know the nerfs coming to certain standard format cards. So it could be hard to kill it. You may not want to kill it is the other side of that coin, because you don't know what waits for you. If you kill Deathwing and that summons essentially a Yogg-Saron, a Malygos, and a Chromagus, then you're in a worse situation than you were before. So I think the idea with Deathwing Dragonlord is to create friction for your opponents where they have to make a really tough decision. And what that means sometimes is that they'll leave Deathwing alive. Instead of killing him and risking an even bigger, harder to deal with board, they might just leave Deathwing alive and, in fact, put up a taunt that gets in his way. Just imagine a Goldshire Footman can stop Deathwing Dragonlord in his tracks, right? So they could just stall out Deathwing and start to win the game because you spent so much mana playing a 12/12 that has trouble doing a lot. Unlike the normal Deathwing, which deletes their board, essentially, this one doesn't have the same immediate impact. So it could, in fact, be just a little bit too slow to really make it work well. It's also a little bit susceptible to silence, because that death rattle will go away. Now, there are a lot of different death rattle card synergies that have been explored in the Old Gods reveals so far, so perhaps there will be some death rattle style decks that this fits into. As a big dragon, it really does also just expand the possibilities for dragon decks in the future. Obviously, this card has the stats and the effect that it might be good. I just think it's probably a little bit slow, a little bit unreliable, and puts too much control in the hands of your opponent. So I don't actually see Deathwing Dragonlord being a fundamental core piece of any particular deck that essentially wins you the game. So it could be good, don't get me wrong. I just don't think it's like a foundational card that defines an archetype. So I hope I'm wrong, though, because I'd love to see an awesome card like this in play a lot. It's got fantastic artwork and a really nifty effect, and could support a dragon deck archetype that doesn't currently exist. So here's hoping for Deathwing Dragonlord. But let's move on to the next card. It is a priest card at 2 mana called Embrace the Shadow. This turn, your healing effects deal damage instead. So this is basically a cheaper Auchenai Soul Priest. But it's a spell and it only lasts for 1 turn. But of course, Auchenai Soul Priest typically only lasts for 1 or 2 turns at most itself. It's very hard sometimes to keep it alive on the board, particularly because you can't heal it when you play it. But I like this card because it's essentially the effect of Auchenai Soul Priest, but it's so much more flexible in that it costs 2 less mana, which means you can do a lot more in the same turn. So I think Embrace the Shadow is actually going to create some combo style priest decks where you run a couple flash heals and a couple Light of the Narus and who knows what else, and you're suddenly able to burn your opponent down for 10, 20, even 25 damage with a Mind Blast or 2. So there's some pretty crazy stuff you can do with this card just because you can save up your resources all at once and unleash it in 10 mana with 8 extra mana on top, whereas with an Akanai Soul Priest you only get 6 extra mana. So there's more you can do with Embrace the Shadow. The other thing I like about this card is that sometimes when you play Akanai Soul Priest, you don't want to commit to losing your heal. If you're against like an aggro class with Hunter and you have 6 health left, playing Akanai Soul Priest pretty much signals your doom, which means you might not be able to play the card at all, might waste a slot in your deck. Whereas with Embrace the Shadow, you don't have to commit to the Akanai Soul Priest, because that Hunter might just leave the Akanai Soul Priest alive and never let you heal again. With Embrace the Shadow, next turn you can come back and heal and do all the fun stuff and recover life. So it's non-committal, it's more flexible, it's a spell, which of course there's always spell synergies, particularly in Priest. I like this card. I don't think it's going to be a fundamental part necessarily of control-style Priest decks, but I think there will be decks that use it and decks designed around it, particularly with combo finishing damage. So I'm really excited to see this one in action. I think it's a really well-designed card, the right mana cost, and a pretty nifty effect as well. Moving on to the next card. This one is a mage card at 5 mana. It is the Servant of Yoggsaron. Now, I don't know what the heck's going on in that artwork. It kind of just looks like a tentacle blob. But I do think it's a pretty nifty card. A frustrating card, perhaps, in many ways, but a strong one, I'll say that. At 5 mana, you're getting 5/4 in stats, which is actually pretty solid. It's not ideal. You'd prefer like a 5/5 or a 5/6. 4 health is a little bit more susceptible than 5 health. But with the removal of stuff like Piloted Shredder from standard format, I would argue that Servant of Yoggsaron is less susceptible than it would otherwise be, just because I think there will be a less steady stream of 4 attack minions hitting the board before you play Servant of Yoggsaron. And at 5 attack, it does trade into a lot of stuff at 5 health. A lot of key cards have 5 health. So it'll be able to trade up and probably isn't quite as bad at trading down. But really, of course, it's the Battlecry of Servant of Yoggsaron that defines it. It has an okay body and a Battlecry that is just absolutely RNG crazy ridiculous. Cast a random spell that costs 5 or less mana, and the targets for that spell are chosen randomly. So that means you play Servant of Yoggsaron, it can cast a fireball. It might cast it on your own face, it might cast it on your opponent's face, it might cast it on a minion, it can cast a frostbolt. It can also cast cards from other classes. So it might cast a Power Word Shield or Shadow Word Death or just anything, right? Any spell is fair game, which means not only is the spell super random from an entirely too large set of spells from 0 to 5 mana, but also the targets are random, so it can be beneficial, it can be a negative. That said, this card's so chaotic and so unreliable that I don't know that it's going to be any good. In general, I think you're going to benefit from spells more often than you'll be punished by them. The same way with Yoggsaron, his effect is like this effect times 1,000. So you'll probably win out most of the time, but sometimes you won't be able to play this card at all just because you're going to risk dying to a Frostbolt, right? Other times you'll be so far behind it's worth the risk because it might help you catch up. But that lack of reliability and consistency means it probably won't be good in most decks. Might be crazy in Arena. There will be, kind of casino style, as they're called, mage decks that play on random effects and random spells that will benefit from this one. But it's probably going to decide some games. It's going to make a lot of highlights. It may sneak into a tournament every once in a while just to punish someone with bad luck. But in reality, I think it's just a little bit too weak and far too inconsistent to be played often. So let's move on to the final card of this part 12 of my review. It's another mage card, and unlike the last one, which I don't think is playable, I think this one is super playable. It's Faceless Summoner. It's a 6 mana mage card with a 5/5 body. So let's address that first. 5/5 is actually pretty solid for a 6-drop. A vanilla 6-drop would be about 6/7 in stats, but 5/5 is just kind of the go-to. This is good for a body that it trades efficiently. It lives to a lot of stuff. A lot of key 6-drops have this stat line: Emperor, Thaurissan, Sylvanas, so on and so forth. So it falls in line pretty closely there as long as it has a strong effect. And it does have a strong effect. The battle cry is summon a random 3-cost minion. So in general, 3-cost minions are going to average out to about a 3/3 body in stats. So that kind of means that you're getting an 8/8 for 6 mana here, which is super good. And not only is it an 8/8 in stats on average, but it's split across 2 bodies, which is typically even better because that makes it harder for opponents to remove. And they might have to use 2 cards, for instance. It's not susceptible to Big Game Hunter, all that stuff. So awesome stats, fills up the board, or at least refills your board to an extent with multiple minions, creates a lot of friction for your opponent. Plus, there are some 3-cost minions that are really strong. For instance, you can get an injured Blade Master off of Faceless Summoner, and its battle cry won't go into effect, which means you could get a 4/7 off of Faceless Summoner. A 4/7 plus a 5/5 for 6 mana, which means you're getting a 9/12 in stats for 6 mana. So there are going to be times where you get that and you're going to feel fantastic. And there really aren't even that many 3-drops that could hurt you necessarily, that are below average in stats. There are certainly some, but in general, it's going to be an extremely strong body to compare to something like a Boulder Fist Ogre for 6 mana that's a 6/7. You'd really only need a 1/2, which is well below average for 3-drops. You're always going to do better than a 1/2. So this card feels like all upside to me. It does something unique for Mage, which is like fills the board up really quickly. In Arena, it's going to be a super dominant card because it's a common quality, which means it's going to show up all the time in Arena and make Mage even better, which is a little bit frustrating. But in general, I just think this card's great. It does have some RNG, but it's going to average out to be a win 90% of the time. And occasionally it's going to just win you the game when you hit that injured Blade Master or some other strong 3-drop. So really incredible card. Frankly, maybe borders on OP. That said, right now there aren't a lot of Mage decks that would use this necessarily. It doesn't fit into like Freeze Mage or Tempo Mage. So there might have to be a new archetype for Mage that shows up to really use Faceless Summoner. But definitely, if there is a mid-range style or control style Mage deck that's minion focused, I could see Faceless Summoner becoming a pretty key part of it. That said, this card may not see play right away just because it doesn't fit into what we understand Mage to be right now. But it definitely has all the numbers and all the components to be a very strong card now or in the future. So Faceless Summoner looks pretty good to me. So that'll wrap it up. That was Faceless Summoner, Servant of Yoggsaron, Embrace the Shadow, and Deathwing Dragonlord. All these cards have what they need to be good, but I'm not sure any of them will actually find their way into a deck. But that's probably good design because it makes us creative and makes things a little bit more fun. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions about these cards, do feel free to leave a comment. And until next time, game on.